generation to generation, and she calls it the Broken Life Journal. Yeah. And inside the book it's a Broken Life Journal, but she calls it the Broken Life Box. And inside the box are trinkets of all of her ancestors.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, there's a background in the book, certainly, and as I mentioned a moment ago, about slavery in the early 1800s. And it was a terrible time in our country, in the United States. This terrible thing was going on, this terrible cultural thing, if you could call it cultural, and it certainly wasn't, but all kinds of terrible things were happening, inbreeding, where the slave masters were actually breeding the slaves together. In many cases, the slave master himself would breed with the slaves and try to create more slaves and so forth and so on.
Yes.
And terrible, you have this in your book, and this very well documented book that you've just written, where some of the slaves couldn't stand the terrible treatment and the abuse that they achieved and they were given, and they tried to run away and they tried to escape, and many times they did escape. They didn't get too far away, and if they were caught and they were brought back to the master, back to the plantation, frequently their hands were cut off, or their feet were cut off, so they couldn't run away again.
Yes.
This actually took place in slavery back at that time and all through the 1800s.
Yes.
Isn't that right? You documented this because you read through the history of all this. And
exactly.
And your own family going back several generations.
Yes, exactly.
There's a history of slavery in your own family.
Exactly. In fact, I have a very odd fact. I have a great-great-grandmother, who was still a slave in 1910.
As recently as 1910?
Yes, which tells you a lot.
I thought all that went away with Abraham Lincoln and all
exactly.
that stuff. This is another 50 years later.
Exactly, but a lot of the mountain people did not know that slavery had ended.
The word didn't get around.
No, especially if they didn't want them to know.
Yeah, and there were those cotton farms and, tobacco farms and cotton mills and so forth, and they had to have somebody to man those. And the word hadn't gotten out in the mountains and in the hinterlands and in the backwoods and so forth, and slavery continued on into the early 1900s.
Exactly.
And was it great-grandmother? Or
yes,
great-grandmother.
Great-great-grandmother.
Was a slave as recently as 1910. That's unbelievable. But on the other hand, besides talking about slavery and all the terrible things that happened in your wonderful book, I found it to be a beautiful love story.
Yes.
You yourself must have a lot of love in your heart, because you sat there and we wrote this book. All these people have such great love for each other. Margarita and Thomas and Magdalena and Maggie and Joshua and all the other wonderful characters that you've created in this book. All they do is to confess their love for each other and their support for each other. And how
they have to be family. You have to be family.
And family is so important. And they would die for one another, and they would give up their lives for one another, and it just and this permeates throughout the book, you know.
Yes.
And you can't write that kind of stuff unless you feel that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Vangie.
Exactly.
So I have to compliment you on that.
Thank you.
It comes from the heart.
Yes.
Congratulations. It's a beautiful book. It really is. The two main characters are Margarita Paladin. I guess that's how you pronounce her last name.
Marguerite Paladin.
She comes from a wealthy family from France, from Europe.
Yes.
And she, I guess you would call her, I guess they don't use the word like this anymore in the vernacular, the mulatto.
Yes.
She was a product of black and white. And I guess they've crossed that out of the English vernacular, and now they call it mixed race or mixed breed or whatever.
Correct.
But anyway, two of the two main characters in the book, who comes from a very wealthy, well-to-do family in France, and she comes to the United States. She's just a young girl.
Correct.
And you want to tell us a little bit more about Marguerite?
Marguerite comes here from France. She's going down to New Orleans to visit her family that she had never seen. She had heard stories from her grandfather. And with her is Julia. And Julia sadly dies the day she gets here. So she's forced into growing up really fast. The second she gets off the stagecoach, unfortunately, she falls right into the man's arms she marries. And he's a Scotsman. And
Thomas Burnett from
Thomas
Scotland.
Burnett.
Also from a well-to-do family.
Yes. And Thomas has secrets of his own. Now, Marguerite knows that she was told by her father, in that country, you can never let anyone know of your African blood. But she tells Thomas, and he says, oh, well, I have secrets too. It doesn't matter to me. And she learns a lot about America and its slavery and the harshness within days.
And how terrible it is, and some of the things we just mentioned before. And he's determined that he wants to try to do whatever he can, and both Margarita and Thomas,
yes,
to see if they could free some of these people and take them with them
Yes.
on a long journey to freedom, to
Yes.
Canada, to Europe, or whatever.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, there's just two of them. There's a Margarita and Thomas, but eventually they have a whole menagerie of hundreds of slaves that they pick up along the way.
Exactly.
And there's this long caravan that follows them along, and eventually they wend their way back to Europe. But in the meantime, they get married.
Yes.
And Margarita becomes pregnant. She's only a youngster. She's only 18 or 19 years old, whatever.
Exactly.
And Thomas is only somewhere in his 20s, I guess.
He's 25.
He's 25, so they're a young couple. And they get married, and she's pregnant. But then there's this curse. And she's afraid that because in the history of her family, the women who have female children, female offspring, something happens to them and they die soon after they have
Their children.
the female baby.
Yes.
Her mother died for the same reason. Her
Yes.
grandmother died the same way. Her great-grandmother died from the same thing.
Exactly.
What's that curse all about? Where'd that come from?
Well, when she when her great-grandmother asked to go away with the Frenchman, the shaman of the tribe put a curse on her grandmother and all of her descendants. 21 sons you fell in love. 21 moons you should have with your female child. Because Marguerite's great-grandmother was promised to another tribe as a wife, as a bride. And that curse has followed them since. So literally 21 days after having a baby.
A female baby.
A female child, they succumb.
Huh.
And so far it's all girls.
Good, too bad they didn't have some boys. They wouldn't have met that.
Exactly.
The curse wouldn't have taken place, I guess. I don't know. But then we get into this business of the African kings.
Yes.
And we were talking about that. You and I exchanged a couple of emails, Vangie, before we did the show. And the African kings sold thousands upon thousands, maybe millions of their own African people into slavery so they could profit from it.
Exactly.
And you and I were talking about that maybe does that take a little bit of the shame and a little bit of the guilt away from us white folks? And because the blame always been put on our shoulders that we caused slavery, back in the 1800s with the cotton farms and the tobacco farms and so forth. But all these African kings, they sold their own people into slavery, so maybe the black folks were a little bit to blame for slavery too, just like us white folks.
Exactly.
And you kind of agree with me on that.
Many African Americans have no idea that it was the capturing and subsequent selling by other tribes. If you were of different religion or if you were of a warring tribe, they didn't keep you as a slave themselves. They sold you.
Yeah.
Why do you think there's so many kings in Africa who are so rich right now?
Yeah. They got rich on the slavery of their own black people.
And even their own children, in many cases, got sold into slavery.
Well, I just got the 2-minute warning, Vangie. As I told you, this show moves very fast. We got so much to talk about, more about this terrific book. I wish I had another 20 minutes because I've got a whole bunch of notes here. You folks are just going to have to go out and buy this book because it's terrific. And I wish we could talk for another hour on this wonderful book. Again, it's called Broken Life. It's pictured right here on our desk. Broken Life, A Fight for Forever. This is book number 1. Going to be a lot of terrific sequels to follow this from our wonderful guest here, Vangie Williams, who's going to write this wonderful story and have it continue on. Best of all, there's a terrific surprise ending. I wish I could tell you what it is, but you can't find out until you buy the book. And you can get this book in many different ways. And Vangie, what are some of the different ways?
You can go to my website, www.mereally.com, mereally.com, or you can go to Amazon if you would like an electronic version, like a Kindle version. We're at Barnes and Nobles, Borders, everywhere, any major bookstore.
You can get this book. It's terrific, and it's a fantastic book, ladies and gentlemen. We can't tell you enough about it. We're down to the 1-minute warning. So, Vangie, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you.
Writing such a terrific book. And ladies and gentlemen, we've been putting on your screen, too, at the bottom of your screen during the course of our 30-minute program, Vangie's website, www, as she mentioned before, mereally.com. It's on the bottom of your screen. Got to go out now, Vangie. Thanks again for coming. Come back and see us again. And lots of success with this wonderful book.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations on it. We always go out, ladies and gentlemen, by saying, keep on communicating for success, and we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.